Good morning and welcome to the Daily Cyber Briefing for Wednesday, the 8th of May. I'm Stephen Ridgway and I've actually managed to configure this streaming software to use a microphone that you can hear. Hence the pause. Right. Major UK security provider leaks what is being described as a trove of guard and suspect data. So it's cyber data, well, cyber security data. It is actual, real people, physical data kind of, physical security kind of data. So apparently Amberstone Security Limited, which is linked to the Argenbright Group, suffered a major cybersecurity incident based around, guess what, misconfigured cloud database. That has exposed 1.2 million documents with sensitive information. So basically the database is just a shade over 245 gigabytes. It includes PII, images of security guards, security credentials, incident reports, and names of theft suspects. According to the cybersecurity researcher who discovered the database, there's nearly 4,500 profile pictures of security personnel, just under 100,000 images of alleged suspects, and 100,000 images labelled guard pics, which are security personnel checking in and out for shifts, including their ID cards. Yeah, ouch. So if you happen to work in the physical security world, be aware this stuff's out there. Also, be aware that there are databases that might include pictures of you as a suspect, which is also very interesting. More on our side of the equation. Come on, really? Why would anybody not think to secure this database properly, and why would you not think to test that it's secured and remains secured? So, really fundamental error in this. If you've got databases with important, confidential, or otherwise sensitive information, firstly, make sure you know how they're configured, know where they are. Actually, yes, start with, do you know where they are? It is interesting, and I've recently had some very healthy discussions around is an inventory of sensitive data necessary and or viable? And I would argue that it is necessary, it is viable, it may not always be easy to do, but you should at least have a policy around where your sensitive data is and how it should be secured. And also be explicit around who should access it. Once you know where your data is, of course, don't just assume that because somebody in the past set it up securely, that it has remained secure, because unless you've got very good auditing on what people are doing, things may well have changed and you may not be aware. And equally, sporadically test your own stuff. Well, in fact, periodically, regularly check your own stuff to make sure that there are no obvious misconfigurations that have crept in, or that there are no equally, especially in cloud environments, that the cloud provider hasn't made changes which has made a previously secure environment insecure. Never happens, I hear the shouts across podcast land. But yes, it does, and it's probably the biggest issue with using something as a service, is that you're entirely dependent on your providers securing your stuff properly. No matter what you do, they can undermine your security, and they might do either inadvertently, or they might change settings of things that you've relied on without you being aware of it. So be aware of that stuff and keep an eye out for it. So the next article I came across is, I think it's rather interesting. There's a weakness, I'm going to call it, in VPN software that is being tracked as, or being referred to as, tunnel vision. The Leviathan Security Group, who've, as they say, they claim to have uncovered and documented it. However, what they have, as it were, uncovered, has been extremely well known for a very long time, although not been discussed, I think, in the context of VPNs. The technique, they've grabbed a CVE for it, CVE 2024-3661, and it's all over the cyber press today. It is effectively saying that you can do a man-in-the-middle attack on a VPN if you can use a rogue DHCP server to inject option 121 routes to client routing tables. Beyond that, they then say, oh, well, okay, you can then route all this traffic via a malicious DHCP server or a malicious gateway under your control, blah, blah, blah. You can do a man-in-the-middle attack. You can grab the keys as they're being negotiated, so on and so forth. I'm sure that there are configurations that are vulnerable to this, but unless I've taken my eye off the ball, I wouldn't have thought that most VPN software by default was, or certainly if you're using VPNs for more than how do I stream US stuff in the UK or whatever it might be, if you're actually using VPNs as a means of security, you would have turned off some of these things anyway. So, there are all sorts of claims like, this is not fixable, blah, blah, blah. Well, okay, firstly, Android at the moment isn't vulnerable to this because it doesn't implement option 121, which is basically allowing your DHCP server to introduce routes into the routing table. So if you've got Android, you're okay. If you're running Linux, you can use network namespaces, to address this issue. Network namespaces is something that I don't know enough about, to be completely honest. It kind of has come into existence after I stopped being the guy with the hands on the keyboard. So I'm going to go away and do a little bit of research on that, because I think it would be quite good fun to understand how that can be used to secure whatever. But I don't know. I'm going to have to do some more research on this. If it's relying on stuff like split tunneling, then we already know that there's a bunch of security vulnerabilities around split tunneling. We also know that option 121 is problematic because it does allow attackers, because generally DHCP is not an authenticated protocol, although there are means by which you can authenticate it, but it generally isn't an authenticated protocol, and so you should be deterministic as to what information you are happy to receive from your DHCP server. So things like default gateway, fine, you're going to need that. Otherwise, blah, 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 IP address, okay. Just the basics, that's fine. But to be able to inject specific other routes via DHCP is probably not a brilliant idea. If you need routing, do it on a router. Don't do it on the client end. That if you find yourself requiring client-side routing decisions to be made by your endpoint OS, you've probably got something wrong with the way that you architected your network. Oh dear, there's a whole generation of people that are going to be upset by that statement, but I'll stand by it. What the hell? Yeah, so I think this requires this. So, firstly, I'll say, do take this seriously because there is something in there. But secondly, I don't. I suspect it doesn't deserve the hype that it's got over the last 12, 18 hours in the press. I'm going to do some more research on that, and if I find out anything more about whether this is or isn't a significant issue, I will, probably come back to it later in the week. So, just at the point where you think, well, I'm fine then because I run an Android device, Android leaks DNS data even with active kill switches. So, okay. So your VPNs are secure from tunnel vision, but they're not secure from leaking what DNS queries you have made, which should have gone through the tunnel, but didn't. So, interesting article on the latest Hacker News website. Quite a short article, but just chucked it in there because I don't want anybody to think that, well, because I run an OS, I'm immune to all sorts of stuff. None of us are. So, okay, Android doesn't by default have one particular weakness, but it has others, and there is one. Read up on it if you are concerned. Okay, on other matters, TikTok is, of course, suing America around the divest, what's being referred to in the register as the divest or die law. So, just as a quick recap, in case you've been living under a rock for the last year, the US government has told TikTok to divest its American activities based around the fact that TikTok's owned by ByteDance. ByteDance is a Chinese company. Chinese companies are required by law to cooperate with Chinese law enforcement agencies, even if that would otherwise be considered illegal in other parts of the world. Excuse me. So, if you're ever wondering whether the Chinese are actually doing all these sorts of things, yes, they are. It's very easy to track this stuff down. So there are kind of two things going on through TikTok. There's an enormous amount of information gathering. Just sucks up everything into very large databases, I strongly suspect, which they'll come back to later if they're ever interested in particular people. And the other one is, all social media is under attack from nation states that have a particular desire for spreading misinformation or influencing viewers, influencing public opinion in favor of particular political or other viewpoints. Goes on astronomically big scale, massive scale. It's often quite subtle, sometimes not so subtle, and gets caught out. So the US has said, look, ByteDance is dodgy. TikTok, sell off your US business or we'll ban you. To which the response has been ByteDance has sued the government, which has resulted, as of course you would expect, a potential extension to the period during which the Chinese government can influence you through TikTok and steal your data. So, yeah, good luck. Interesting to see where that one will go. It has been rumbling along for a long time. And then finally, from me today, the UK's deeply flawed investigatory powers bill has, well, is now law, or has had royal assent. So watch out for all sorts of agencies in the UK, um, basically snooping on you for reasons which maybe, well, as the police have recently, over the last few years, demonstrated. They're particularly bothered about how you think. Not terribly bothered about car crime, car theft. No, don't investigate that one. Yeah. Shoplifting. No, just we don't investigate that one. Being reported for potentially thinking that, I don't know, holding perfectly legitimate, scientifically based views on something. Oh dear, that might be hate speech. So yes, watch out. As with many regulations in the UK in this kind of arena, it's well-meaning, and yes, obviously, nobody wants child abusers to be able to hide on the internet. Obviously not. However, instead of targeting extortionists, abusers, whatever it might be, we just basically written into law something that says, "Oh, well, it's all right." A large swathe of public organisations or public bodies can now just sweep up your data without a warrant. Now, what makes it really interesting for me is that it's taken a while to get to this point, and one of the sticking points has been around surveillance of parliamentarians. And about the only decent amendment to the bill that's come in is a triple lock authorization process for the surveillance of MPs. Right. So the MPs require triple lock authorization. Don't know what that means, but probably, stuff like, the Secretary of State plus a judge plus whatever have to all agree that this is okay. So if you're an MP, you have very strong protections against surveillance. So they clearly understand that these powers are open to abuse or misuse, and they've basically protected themselves. And if anybody thinks that if anybody thinks the current cohort of MPs are impressive in any way, I think, go and look back over the last 50 years worth of history as to who, regardless of political affiliation, who has been impressive, and compare them to what we see at the moment. So they believe that this stuff is dangerous and shouldn't be applied to them, but is perfectly okay to apply to us. Yeah, good one. I'm not impressed. So there we are. That's enough of my political ranting for today. Government overreach 101. They will do things that are not expected, and it will be to the detriment of most people. So that's it for me for today. I hope you have a good day. It's sunny in the south of England today, which is always very nice. And I will speak to you again